Hey, what's up everyone? It's P-LASK here, and as many of you know, I make house and techno music under the alias P-LASK, but I also make drum and bass music under the alias Man from Another Place. And I found out recently that Sonic Academy is releasing a classic 90s pads preset pack for Anna 2, and I got really excited because the type of drum and bass I make is very 90s inspired. I like kind of atmospheric drum and bass from artists like Nookie or Blue Martin or LTJ Bookham. And I thought, what a great opportunity to take some of those presets and just build a new track. So I've created this course, How to Make 90s Atmospheric Drum and Bass, and I'll walk you through my process of how I'm going to utilize some of the presets. We'll of course tweak a few of them and modify them in different ways. If you don't have Anna 2, you should be able to follow along with a favorite sampler if you want to layer some samples together, and we'll look at some of the presets, how they're constructed, so you can kind of follow along and build sounds that are somewhat similar. We'll of course program some drums, layer in an amen break, and process some vocals, put all the pieces together in the arrangement, add a bit of automation, and finally do a bit of mixing and mastering at the end to get it all sounding nice and loud. So yeah, thanks for dropping by. Check out the course. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you learn something new about making 90s atmospheric drum and bass, or Ableton Live, or just production in general. So sit back, relax, enjoy, and I'll see you in the first video. Okay, so now let's add a bit of processing to our drums, but before we do that, I just want to kind of keep an eye on our levels here. I noticed that our main out is getting a little close to 0, and we're going to be adding a few more things to this project. So what I like to do is just kind of a little quick fix is grab an audio effect called utility, put it on the main output track, and just knock it down. This gain control, just knock the volume down by a couple dB, maybe like -5 or something like that. Yeah, so we got plenty of headroom. I usually like to keep about 6 decibels of headroom when I'm producing and mixing. Okay, that sounds good. Now let's group all of our drum elements together here. So I'm going to select the first one, hold Shift, select the last one. Then I'm going to press Command or Control G to group all of them together. And then we'll rename this drum bus. And let's add some effects to it. Now, in the 90s, a hardware compressor that was often used in processing drums for a lot of drum and bass tunes is the 1176 compressor. And fortunately for us, Sonic Academy has a really great compressor called the SA76, which is an emulation of an 1176 compressor, and we're going to utilize that on our drums just to kind of brighten them up, add a bit of bus compression to them. So let's go to our plugins folder here, and if you don't have this, you could use any compressor you want just to kind of gel the parts together and get them sounding as good as possible. But I really like the sound of this plugin, and I want to use it. So we're going to take SA76, here it is. We'll drag it on our drum bus. That'll be the first thing we put on there. And we'll just kind of start with this default preset and tweak it a little bit. The idea with this is we want to add a little bit of brightness and energy to the drums without necessarily just adding a ton of gain to it. So it's nice that we have this gain compensation button on here by default. So let's kind of turn this up a little bit. You'll see that as I increase the input, it starts to turn the output down a little bit as well. Let's keep the attack fast. Let's maybe speed up the release a little bit too. I'm going to reduce the mix, which is kind of the dry-wet mix, so we get a little bit of like a parallel compression effect. So we're not fully compressing the drums, but we're getting a bit of a heavily compressed copy of the drums blending in underneath. Maybe increase this drive a little bit too. Change our ratio. Let's try different ratios out. Sounds like it distorts a little bit too hard there. Let's maybe keep it at 8:1. Check the gain reduction. There's not really a rhyme or reason to what I'm doing. I'm just kind of doing what I think sounds good to my ear. If I just take a quick glance at the input level here and then the output level here, it looks roughly the same. And if I bypass this, versus turning it on, kind of fills out the quieter parts a little bit. I like the sound of that. So we're going to keep that on. Always save this as a preset as well. Save as preset. Call it DnB drums. Go into my user preset folder. Cool. Okay, next, let's add a couple of auto filters here because I'm kind of thinking ahead here. There are some special effects I'd like to be able to automate when we're arranging the song to play around with the drum groove a little bit here. So let's grab some auto filters. Let me clear out my search. Auto filters should show up right near the top of the list. There it is. I'm going to take 2 of these, and I'm in Ableton Live 12.2. They've updated the look of the auto filter, so if you're on Ableton Live 12.1 or earlier, it's going to look a little bit different, but all the functionality is going to be more or less the same. So we'll get 2 copies of that. One of these I'm going to leave as a low pass filter. I'm going to leave it all the way open. The other one I'm going to switch to a high pass filter and then leave that all the way open as well. I'm going to take the resonance control on both of these and set them to about 50%. I'm not going to leave these on at all times. That's important here. Is I want them to sort of be active when I want them to, but I don't want them to be just sitting on the entire time. So what we're going to do is turn them both off. And this, I think, might be a good time to start building our audio effect rack that I wanted to build for my drum processing here. So we've got our SA76. Let's include our 2 auto filters, and I'm going to press Command G. I've selected all 3 of those. Command or Control G to set up my audio effect rack. So it kind of bundled all those together into a rack. Then I'm going to hit this macro controls button over here, and I want to set up a couple quick things. So the first thing I want to do is be able to set up my filter frequencies or my filter cutoffs for my low pass and my high pass filter. In fact, let's rename these LP. I'll rename this one HP for high pass. So let's take the frequency on our low pass filter, and let's map this to macro number 1. I'll take the frequency on my high pass filter, map it to macro number 2. And then I might take the resonance on both of these and map them to macro number 3. So that macro 3 is controlling the resonance of both. You can see that moving on both things there. Let's just rename this Reso. We'll call this LP, maybe LPF for LP filter, low pass filter, and then HPF. Now another thing I want to do, because right now these are just off, right? So I can move these macros all I want, but my effects aren't doing anything. So the other thing I want to do is take these LPF and HPF macros, and I want to map them to the on-off switches as well. So let's take our LP device on button here. Let's map that to that first macro, LPF. Let's take the HP on-off switch, map it to HPF. Okay, so I'm closer to what I want, but check this out. So if I take the low pass filter macro and I move it, so it looks like it starts with it on, it's on, and then as I move it down, about halfway down, it turns off. That's not quite what I want. My idea here is that when this macro is all the way up and my filter is open, I want this filter device to be turned off. And with my high pass filter, when it's all the way down and the filter is completely open, I want it to be off, which it looks like it is, but check it out. If I move it up, it's off, 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 and then it turns on halfway up. So again, not really very useful for what I'm trying to do here. So we need to do a little bit of macro finagling here. So to do that, we're going to hit the map button on the top of the audio effect rack. Then I'm going to open my browser. So I can either click this button up here, press Option Command or Alt Control B. And then I see my list of my mappings. And what we want to look for are those device on macro mappings. So let's start with the low pass filter one. So what this is telling me is this is the range of my macro dial in which that will be turned on. That low pass filter device will be turned on. So I only want it to be turned on between values of 0, meaning when it's turned all the way down, I want it to stay on. But when it's all the way up, I want it to be turned off. So I'm going to change the max value from its default setting, which is 127, to 126. So I just have one value there where it's switched off. So if I move this dial all the way to the top, it's off. As soon as I start to move it down a little bit, it turns on and it'll sweep the frequency for me. Very classic DnB jungle-y kind of effect, right? Now we're going to do a similar thing here with the high pass filter. So let's go to device on. Here I want the maximum value to stay the same because when it's all the way up, I want it to stay on. So we're going to keep the max value at 127, but my minimum value I'm going to set to 1, meaning that when the knob is between all those values, it'll be on, but as soon as I pull it all the way down to a value of 0, it's going to switch off, right? So now you can use the high pass filter to thin it out, the low pass filter to kind of suck it all away for a build up or something like that, and then bring it back. Okay, and then we got our kind of global resonance control here. Awesome. Okay, so let's close the browser, close our mappings for a minute. Let's keep going with this. I want to add a couple more effects to this. Let's add a glue compressor, some sort of compressor after these, because especially if we're sweeping through the frequencies and we have the resonance turned up, we're going to get some volume spikes. So we just want to throw a compressor in there to kind of keep things under control. I'll use Ableton's glue compressor, which is going to be under G, right? I want to make sure I put it inside the rack. Let's make a couple of changes. I want the attack and the release to be nice and fast. We can probably just keep the ratio at 4:1. Let's maybe pull the threshold down a little bit, and let's just sweep those filters a bit. I'm going to just close these devices up. But you can see how it kind of catches peaks in certain areas as I'm sweeping through the frequencies, and that's really what I'm looking for. I don't want it to be constantly clamping down on the sound, but just as I sweep through my filter frequencies, this is catching those peaks and just kind of keeping things under control. Probably turn this up a little bit. And then we'll just add a little bit of makeup gain, maybe like 1 dB. Okay, very nice. Let's just add a tiny, tiny bit of EQ. We'll put it on the rack as well. I could do just a low cut at, we can keep that really low because we do want our kick in there, but any sort of subsonic frequencies maybe we don't need. Let's do a little dip where that snare is kind of crashing through a little bit loud. So activate band number 2 here. Right around there, just a tiny little dip, and then we'll narrow the Q. Coming through a little hot. And again, I don't want to get too caught up on mixing here, but there are just some things I'm seeing that I want to address. To make it more old school sounding, let's just shave a little bit more of the top end off. Like lower sample rate, lower bit depth, lower resolution audio. And then we'll add another, maybe band 7, do a high shelf, or actually we'll use a bell curve, we'll use band 6. Maybe just pull some of those high mids up like a tiny, tiny bit. Like half a dB here, something like that. That's fine. And again, we'll do a proper mix down later, but those are just a few things I was hearing that I wanted to catch. And then what else do we want to add? Let's add a little bit of like a cool flanger effect that we could toss in for transitions and stuff. So let's grab the phaser flanger, or flanger phaser. I never remember what it's called now. There it is, phaser flanger. We'll switch it to the flanger. Let's slow the rate down a little bit. Maybe pull the amount down, but I do want to pull the feedback up so the effect is a little more prominent. And let's try to invert the polarity of the feedback signal. That gives it a really cool kind of comb filtery effect, a more prominent comb filtery effect. Maybe just adjust the delay time a little bit here. Now this is something, again, I don't want to leave that on the whole time, but maybe we macro map the dry wet so we can kind of punch that effect in. Yeah, I like that. Okay, yeah, let's set up that macro. We didn't map anything to macro number 4 yet, so let's call this flanger. Cool. I like it. And then maybe we'll throw a gate on here as well so we can create some gating effects, just some kind of choppy gating effects. We'll throw that in at the end. Whoops, I want to make sure I put it inside my rack. I'm going to turn this return threshold all the way down. I'm not going to necessarily go into a big full-on discussion of what the gate is. If there's interest in that, I'd be happy to do like a whole course on that, or maybe a course on some of the stock Ableton mixing devices that I think are really great. But just real quick, the idea with the gate is we set a threshold. When the volume of the signal goes over the threshold, we hear it. When it drops below the threshold level, it drops in volume by the level that we set as the floor. So it's going to, anything that goes under the threshold is going to be reduced in volume or attenuated by 40 decibels. Let's actually bring that down a little bit lower, maybe 60. And you can hear already that sounds cool. So that threshold right around the middle line there, where only some of the peaks of the kicks and snares and some of the hats are coming through. If I bring the threshold up all the way, we don't hear anything because nothing is going over the threshold. If we bring it down a little bit more, we'll hear everything. But we can really stutter the beat and make it sound all chopped up with that, or keep it full on. So let's maybe just map that threshold level to a macro as well. Let's map it to macro number 5. And I think we should be good with our drum processing here. We got some macros set up. If I reduce this, I just have this empty macro 6. I just use this minus button to remove some of these extra macros here. We have 5 macros. Let's actually rename this one gate toggle or something. Just call it gate. But yeah, this minus button reduces the number of empty macros. So we see this empty macro 6. Sometimes when I have an empty macro like that, I'll just rename it to like a dash or something, and then I'll recolor it just dark black or something, just so I can tell that it's inactive. Another thing I might do is just color code these quickly. Maybe anything that has to do with the filter, I'll give it this red color. Anything that has to do with the flanger, I'll give it a different color, maybe a little yellow, and then the gate. Orange, sure. So we know that these are all related to the filter, and then these are 2 separate effects. Oh, too much. That's cool. Okay, so we got our drum processing good to go here. Moving on, we'll throw in just an extra rack with a few additional hits, and then we'll get into programming our bass.